Welcome to the podcast, Blind Faith. This podcast is one that explores how faith and blindness might connect or interconnect or not connect. My name is Mark Madavan, and it's my privilege to be the presenter of this podcast brought to you by Torch Trust for the Blind. In each episode, I'm chatting with a different person about their experience of blindness and their journey a wee bit. I'm going to jump straight in and invite the guest for this episode, Brian Anderson. I really give a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Mark.
And thank you for agreeing to be part of this episode. I want to jump straight in. And Brian, what's your experience with blindness?
I've had a sight impairment all my life. I was born with cataracts, and for possibly the first 6 years of my life, they were quite dense cataracts. So I don't think I saw very much. I certainly have no visual memories from the first few years of my life. Cataracts weren't routinely operated on in children in those days, and I was left until I was 6 years old, and the operations restored some of my vision. But of course, by that time, the damage had been done to optic nerves and so on, and I was left with a lovely condition called nystagmus, which is basically wobbly eyes, and I found it extraordinarily difficult to focus on anything. I've got high myopia, and I'm quite sensitive to light and changes in light. And of course, as I've got older, my vision's deteriorated a little bit further still. So I think I'm actually technically registered as blind, although I do still have sufficient vision for decent mobility, and I can read with magnifiers and low vision aids, that sort of thing.
I mean, one of the things with sight loss and limited vision is everyone's a little bit different. And even when you have a title of things, because I think cataracts, some people will go, oh, I understand that. But obviously you bring it to a higher level and bring different complications and things. And basically you struggle seeing. And how have you find that how does that impact your everyday life? Because you said you can use magnifying glasses and stuff, but how does that impact some like everyday life stuff?
It's very odd, and a lot of other visually impaired people I speak to find this quite difficult, but nobody ever really told me I was visually impaired. So I've always just got on and done things. And at school, I obviously struggled a lot. So I was sent off to a residential boarding school for children with visual impairment. But again, in those days, they didn't make a great deal of effort. It was, if you can't see the blackboard, get up and stand closer. Here's a magnifier, but nobody told me how to use it. So I developed strange techniques of using magnifiers. And to be honest, all my life, I've just learnt to cope. In work, again, nobody ever asked me if I was visually impaired, so I didn't bother telling them. And I just got on with things and made the most of the opportunities that came along.
Are you quite an inventive person, or is it more necessity has inspired that?
I think it is necessity. I'm not particularly inventive or imaginative. I just like to get on and get things done very practically. I'm quite a practical person, so I like to get on and find solutions to problems.
I think actually being practical is a really helpful thing, because you think I can't do it this way, so I need to do it another way, and you just get stuck in and do things, and that takes on some interesting solutions, I'm guessing. Have you encountered any solutions along the way that you do, and you suddenly turned out that, oh, that's quite strange?
Oddly, I think I've learnt to do things tactilely rather than by vision. I never rely on vision for doing things. I always double check tactilely. So I mean, I can actually screw grub screws into locks and things like that, whereas other people really struggle with it. And it's just silly little things. I've just been on holiday, and I suddenly realised that I was in a strange room, and it was a cabin on a boat, and we weren't bothering to put the lights on. So I was just finding my way about, just feeling my way about and sensing my way about. But not really. I don't really. I never think of myself as being any different to other people. I just like to get on with things.
So, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, well, actually, that whole thing of doing stuff without turning lights on, I know I often would just go around the house without putting lights on, and then it's my wife who turns them on, because it just didn't cross my mind. With the things that you just get on with things, is it that you How do you emotionally connect with that? I mean, with the fact that you suddenly realize you can't do things, or actually you are visually impaired, has that sort of stirred up emotions?
No, I think it used to stir up emotions in me. I used to be quite resentful when, I mean, I was a school teacher and I worked in a school of 80 people, and they used to put me down on the minibus driving list in the days before you needed a special license, and I was the only member of staff in that school who didn't drive a car, and nobody seemed to acknowledge that. Nobody took that on board, and I used to be quite resentful over just little things like that. You know how easy life was for other people who didn't have to struggle with sight loss.
I think that's a really interesting thing, is that we can look at other people and going, you don't know how easy it is for
Mm,
you. You don't want to say it because it doesn't sound good,
mm,
but you actually think that. And so, okay, just trying to skip back a little bit.
mm.
So, did you actually drive the van?
No, no, no. I went and collected the minibus keys, and then somebody realised and stopped me before I got to the door.
That's good, because
Yeah,
my next question is, you said it's a school of 80. I was wondering, did it start at 80, or you managed to dwindle it down with your driving?
yeah,
Just wanted to check.
yeah.
So did they realize that you couldn't do it, or is it that they didn't think about it,
They
or
just didn't think.
yeah?
Just didn't think. I mean, the weekly sheet of information for teachers was always given out in relatively small print, and mine was just impossible for me to read. So I'd go along. The first job I would do when I picked the sheet up was I'd go and enlarge it on the photocopier, and just little things like that. Things that a little bit of thought from other people would have
Yeah.
made life so much easier for me.
So you just made the solution, and to
Yeah,
made it larger.
yeah.
So just explore that a little bit, of that resentment that sort of lingers, and I'm sensing it's not this big deep resentment, but there's just that taste in your mouth of resentment.
Mm.
Is it a case that um that you're feeling that people should just know, or do you think that you told them and they didn't seem to listen?
I think that because, like a lot of visually impaired people, I desperately want to be seen as being just the same as everybody else. I don't want to be different. I don't want to stand out from a crowd. I just think people don't acknowledge. I'm quite happy to tell people that I'm visually impaired. I can't see that. Sometimes the reaction's not great, and sometimes the reaction upsets me. But most of the time, people are fine with it, and then they go away and forget it because I hope in most of the circles I mix in, I'm just Brian. I'm just one of the team, one of the crowd.
And that's one of the sort of interesting dynamics, is because we want to be, just see me as Mark, just see you
Mm,
as Brian.
mm,
But the truth is, but I also, my sight is limited, so I also do need some extra help
mm.
along the way. So don't just treat me that way sometimes. And so, are we sometimes asking people to do an impossible thing, do you think?
I don't think it's impossible. I think sometimes some people think it's too difficult. Or what does get to me sometimes is I think people think that if they acknowledge it, then I'm going to ask them for more help than they would give to somebody else. I'm going to be more needy, more demanding. I'm going to cause them a problem, whereas somebody else who was fully sighted wouldn't be in that situation.
That's interesting. Because I think sometimes we can think that people are fear. I mean, people are fearful of helping blind folks because they don't know what to do.
Mm,
But you just said another dynamic, which is that people are fearful because they're afraid that they're going to basically unleash a floodgates
mm.
of becoming your next carer.
Oh
Which
yeah, absolutely. It's just we try. My wife's totally blind as well, and I mean we both desperately try not to be demanding of other people. We are fiercely independent, and she always has been. She's held down a good job. I've held down a reasonably good job, and we've always tried to make it so that people don't fear having to support us or give us give us a lot of extra help, and it's just the way we are. We like to be as independent as we possibly can.
Well, and actually, because one things I've been chatting with different folks who are wrestling with blindness,
Mm,
and some are they don't like asking for help because they don't want to be a burden,
mm,
and none don't want to ask for help because actually we're quite independent, and
mm.
we like to sort it out ourselves.
Yes.
So, and people are different, but how about this? Do you think that you, and maybe your wife as well, there are times when, in hindsight, you should have just asked for help?
Oh, absolutely. Lots of times life would have been so much easier had I gone and asked for help. Wouldn't always get it, but I think one of the experiences of life I've had is that some of the times when I've asked for help when I've really needed it, for example, at university, I never did see the disability officer in the university, even though I asked for it months before I started. And at work, I've asked for help from various people, and it wasn't until very late in my working career that I actually got any extra help and support.
Because I think one of the things I know rattles in my head, and I'm not sure if it's your experience as well, is sometimes you're thinking, okay, I just can't do it. Suck it up.
Mm.
Just get on with it. And there's other things that saying, if I worked a bit harder, then I can do it. And some things, if I just asked, it would actually work harder. And trying to discern which one of those three I need to do, either just deal with it or work harder or ask someone. I guess I wrestle, but I flick between those sometimes and going, have I picked the right option?
Yeah, I completely understand that. I often think that it's. I like to take it on myself, but then I just think, oh, please, if I just said to someone, and 9 times out of 10, when you do say it to someone, they'll just sort things out for you so easily, like being guided around places. I don't like holding other people's arms and things like that, but sometimes I've come to the conclusion that sometimes it's easier just to take somebody's arm and walk with them, or use a long cane and just get on with it and just suck it up and see.
I don't, because I always grab people's shoulders actually, I
Mm,
put people's arms. But the thing, okay, again, confession time. The thing that really annoys me is when people grab my armor.
yeah.
I'm going to help you across the road, and they grab my arm. I'm going, no,
Mm,
I'm not a child that needs to be dragged. I'm a person who needed to be guided.
mm.
And I'm going to be gracious and say they want to help, but sometimes people can overhelp.
I was once taken across a road that I didn't actually want to cross, but
Okay,
that's one of those things.
how polite are you? Did you then thank them for
I thanked them, let them walk away, and I crossed back over the road
it?
on my own.
So you're very British.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That's funny. Um, with just that practicality, I just
Mm,
one more little thing I want to push on
mm.
this one.
Yeah, sure.
I think you said earlier is that as you get older, it changes a little bit.
Mhm.
Do you ask for help more, less?
I definitely ask for help more now. And I think partly it's because when I finished with my teaching career, I went to work for the RNIB, and I was working with people doing their living with sight loss courses and teaching people. And one of the things I was telling people was go and ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't find it to be, don't be embarrassed about asking for help. And then I thought, well, I'm not doing that myself. And I just think now, well, it's so much easier for someone else to do a job, as long as I'm not a real burden to them, as long as I'm not sort of taking them out of their comfort zone or anything. Then yes, I'll go and ask for help.
I think that's really good to ask, and I think that to be a burden to them, I think sometimes we're afraid we're being a burden, so we don't
Mm,
ask. But one thing I've discovered, I'm not sure again it's your experience, is that actually people on the whole are really willing to help
yeah,
more than you think.
hmm absolutely. And we've got lots of friends who say, well, offer us lifts and things like that. And I very rarely ask, but what I do always say to them is, the day I do ask, it's because I really, really do need this help. And people seem to appreciate that.
I think that being honest and having that conversation, I'm a little bit do it a slightly different way. Is
Mm,
I ask people for help, but I also give them an easy out. I'm
mm,
saying, I need a lift this day for this. And saying, but no pressure if you're
mm.
busy because I've got a list of people to ask.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if they say no, they're not letting me down.
Mm,
And if they say yes, they're helping me.
yeah.
And it's just trying to make it easier for them and just thinking about them a little bit.
Yes.
My experience again is that as you get older, you just learn some of the tricks and you're a little bit less, I don't know, sensitive about it all.
Exactly. Now I'm at an age where it doesn't. I don't actually really care all that much what other people think about me, so I just get on with it and do it.
And I've said the same. I always say the little caveat is when I say I don't care what people think. I mean, I do. I want
Yeah, I
people,
do. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but with that, as in if someone thinks, yeah, I understand. So we understand. Whether our listeners understand, I don't know, but
Mm.
try. How, how does faith fit into this? Because I want to talk about blind faith and faith and practicalities and asking and stuff. But how does God fit into your story?
God came into my story quite late. I was just getting on with life. I was okay. I was married with two young kids. I was living what I thought was a good life. I was an okay, good person. I was reliable. I was trustworthy. I got on. I was a team player. I lots of nice friends and things. And then one day I woke up and my wife was dead. She died suddenly, and it was just a real change. My life changed in seconds, and it was coming to terms with that. I realized that there was so much missing in my life, that I was I'd relied so heavily on my wife as a partner, as a best friend, as the mother of my children, as the car driver in practical terms. And I was in a very difficult place. I had to give up an extremely good job that involved a lot of national travel, and I had to come home because the boys were both still at school. So that all changed my life, turned my life around completely. And I just found myself in a very lost place. And I suddenly was not just, I suddenly became this blind guy
Hmm.
who, friends disappeared, because they were suddenly realized that they were my wife's friends as much, or they were friends of us as a couple. And I was in an extraordinarily lonely place. And I started to go down the route of depression, which was no good because I had two boys to look after, and I had to be there for them. And I started to look at what was missing in my life, and I couldn't find answers from any of the sort of worldly things that were going on around me. The support mechanisms and counselling and things just didn't do me any good. And one day I was in the Lake District, and I met my wife, my present wife, and she was clearly somebody very different. She was clearly a Christian. She was very faithful, and we got on very well. We carried on a relationship over the telephone. She was actually living in Southampton. I was living in the northeast, so it was quite a long distance relationship. But she told me that people in her church were praying for me. That really had a major effect, a massive effect on me. And I started to look and see what this was all about. What is this relationship that people have with God? And I went along to an Alpha course, and I have to say, that as an Alpha course goes, I found it quite uncomfortable. I could accept a lot of the things that people were saying, but the way it was delivered and the way it was like a competition to see who could win me for God
Hmm.
made me feel so uncomfortable. But it made me think, and it made me search, and it made me research. And my sister-in-law gave me some really helpful books. And I just found one day that I was praying, and I was asking God to forgive me and to accept me. And my life changed and from that moment onwards.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's often those points where we thinking, I don't know where to look.
Mm,
And what's really interesting is it wasn't blindness, but blindness was part of that,
mm.
and it was a bigger gap in your life than that.
Yes. Yeah.
And obviously you met with God, and God met with you, and you got married eventually, I'm
Yes,
guessing.
oh, we did,
Yep.
definitely. Yeah.
And now you're past that crisis
Mm.
point, as it were.
Yes.
So is God all done now?
No, God is definitely not done. I'm still a work in progress. For God, I'm probably a bit of a challenge. I could not believe that someone as great as God, as big, as powerful, as almighty as He is, would want a relationship with me. And I am just so grateful because I know now that whatever goes on in my life, whatever changes occur, whatever troubles and uh, problems I have to face, God is always there. And unlike earthly friends and earthly relationships, God never changes. His word is true. His word is solid. It's based on a promise that can't be broken.
How about God and your blindness? Because obviously your blindness continues.
Hmm.
Because some of
Yeah.
that tragedy you've faced has been,
Hmm.
that a lot of that got
Yeah.
rearranged and stuff, but your
Yeah.
blindness continues.
Yeah.
So how about God and blindness? How does that fit together?
Well, the one thing I know about the relationship that I have with God is that one day blindness won't matter. It's a passing thing. It's a thing to do with this life, and God's made me the way I am for his purposes. And I actually don't know what his purposes are for me. It may be just in the way I conduct myself with handling the blindness, and as an example to other people, or as a just to show it. Never regarded blindness as being a burden that I carry or a cross to bear. It is just, blindness is who I am, and this my visual impairment makes me the person I am, and perhaps by showing that I can live with this, it may help other people. And I know blindness these days, in the scheme of all the problems that people face, all the problems that people have with neurodiversity, with other disabilities, with aging, with bereavement, it is just another. It's just another element, and it's what happens in my life. It's I'm not immune from the other things, but blindness is just part of who I am, and
Mm.
perhaps God has a purpose for it.
Thank you. That's just amazing, and that's, I think some of the listeners will just get that,
Mm,
and I think someone won't get it. But
mm,
I just want to encourage you to. It's that journey, and what I loved about that is that bigger view of God and God stepping in,
mm,
and your sight loss is just, it's just part of who you are,
mm.
and not who you are. It's part of who you are as
Yeah.
other things crowd in and you got to deal with.
Mm,
Brian, as we come to the end of the
mhm.
podcast, I'm ending each podcast asking my guest, if I had a time machine and could whiz
Oh,
you back to the early Brian of like
mm,
19, 20s years old, and the senior mature Brian I have
mm.
before me now was to actually give a word of advice or some wisdom or blindness, faith, or anything, what would you say?
Don't worry. Things work out. Get to know God sooner, and you can trust. You can trust God. You can't always trust people. It's it's just build a relationship with God. Learn that His word is true. It will not change, and it is for you. It's not something that's for other people. It's for everyone who will just respond to it.
Cool. Thanks. I think that's great.
Mm,
Thank you for joining me,
mm.
Brian, and just thanks for that. And let's come to the close. Just thanks, listeners, for being part of this episode, and I hope to connect with you again soon.
If you are living with sight loss or support someone who is, then Torch is here for you. Get in touch at torchtrust.org.